Day 10. The 7th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Miette. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the 7th story. King Pedro, being apprised of the fervent love borne him by Lisa, who thereof is sick, comforts her, and forthwith gives her in marriage to a young gentleman, and having kissed her on the brow, ever after professes himself her knight.
When Fiammetta was come to the end of her story, and not a little praise had been accorded to the virile magnificence of King Charles, albeit one there was of the ladies, who being a Ghibelline joined not therein, Pomponea, having received the king's command, thus began.
None is there of discernment, worshipful my ladies, that would say otherwise than you have said touching good King Charles, unless for some other cause she bear him a grudge. However, for that there comes to my mind, the, perchance no less honourable in treatment of one of our Florentine girls by one of his adversaries, I am minded to recount the same to you. What time the French were driven forth of Sicily, there dwelt at Palermo one of our Florentines. That was an apothecary, Bernardo Puccini by name, a man of great wealth, that by his lady had an only and exceeding fair daughter, then of marriageable age. Now, King Pedro of Aragon, being instated in the sovereignty of the island, did at Palermo make with his barons marvellous celebration thereof, during which, as he tilted after the Catalan fashion, it befell that Bernardo's daughter, Lisa by name, being with other ladies at a window, did thence espy him in the course, whereat, being prodigiously delighted, she regarded him again and again, and grew fervently enamoured of him. Nor yet, when the festivities were ended, and she was at home with her father, was there aught she could think of but this, her exalted and aspiring love, in regard whereof that which most irked her was her sense of her low rank, which scarce permitted her any hope of a happy issue, but, for all that, give over her love for the king she would not, nor yet, for fear of worse to come, dared she discover it. The king meanwhile, recking, witting nothing of the matter, her suffering waxed immeasurable, intolerable, and her love ever growing, with ever fresh accessions of melancholy, the fair maiden, overborne at last, fell sick, and visibly day by day wasted like snow in sunlight. Distraught with grief thereat, her father and mother afforded her such succour as they might with words of good cheer, and counsel of physicians, and physic, but all to no purpose, for that she, in despair of her love, was resolved no more to live. Now, her father, assuring her that there was no whim of hers but should be gratified, the fancy took her that, if she might find apt means, she would, before she died, make her love and her resolve known to the king, wherefore one day she besought her father to cause Minuccio d'Arezzo to come to her, which Minuccio was a singer, and the musician of those days, reputed most skilful, and well seen of King Pedro. Bernardo, deeming that Lisa desired but to hear him play and sing a while, conveyed her message to him. And he, being an agreeable fellow, came to her forthwith, and after giving her some words of loving cheer, sweetly discoursed some airs upon his viol, and then sang her some songs, whereby, while he thought to comfort her, he did but add fire and flame to her love. Presently the girl said that she would fain say a few words to him in private, and when all else were withdrawn from the chamber. Minuccio, quoth she, thee have I chosen, deeming thee most trusty to be the keeper of my secret, relying upon thee in the first place never to betray it to a soul, and next to lend me in regard thereof such aid as thou mayst be able, and so I pray thee to do. Thou must know then, Minuccio mine, that on the day when our lord King Pedro held the great festival and celebration of his triumph, I, seeing him tilt, was so smitten with love of him, that thereof was kindled within my soul the fire which has brought me, as thou seest, to this pass. And knowing how ill it beseems me to love a king, and being unable, I say not to banish it from my heart, but so much as to bring it within bounds, and finding it exceeding grievous to bear, I have made choice of death as the lesser pain, and die I shall. But should he wot not of my love before I die, sore disconsolate should I depart, and knowing not by whom more aptly than by thee I might give him to know this my frame, I am minded to entrust the communication thereof to thee, which office I entreat thee not to refuse, and having discharged it, to let me know, that dying thus consoled, I may depart this pain. Which said, she silently wept. Marvelling at the loftiness of the girl's spirit and her desperate determination, Minuccio commiserated her not a little, and presently it occurred to him that there was a way in which he might honourably serve her. Wherefore, Lisa, quoth he, my faith I plight thee, wherein thou mayst place sure confidence that I shall never play thee false, and lauding thy high emprise, to wit, the setting thine affections upon so great a king, I proffer thee mine aid, whereby so thou wilt be of good cheer, I hope, and believe, that before thou shalt see the third day from now go by, I shall have brought thee tidings, which will be to thee for an exceeding great joy. And, not to lose time, I will set to work at once. And so Lisa, assuring him that she would be of good cheer, and plying him afresh with instant obsecrations, bade him Godspeed. And Minuccio, having taken leave of her, hied him to one Mico de Siena, a very expert rhymester of those days, who, at his instant request, made the ensuing song. Hence hie thee, love, and hasting to my king, give him to know what torment dire I bear, how that to death I fare, still close, for fear, my passion harbouring. Lo, love, to thee with clasped hands I turn, and pray thee seek him where he tarrieth, and tell him how I oft for him to yearn, so sweetly he my heart enamoureth. And of the fire wherewith I thoroughly burn I think to die, but may the hour on earth save when my grievous pain shall with my breath surcease, till when neither may fear nor shame the least abate the flame, to his ears my woeful story bring. Since of him I was first enamoured, never hast thou, O love, my fearful heart, with any such fond hope encouraged, as e'er its message to him to impart. To him, my lord, that me so sore bested, holds, dying thus, 'twere grievous to depart. Perchance, were he to know my cruel start, 'twould not displease him, might I but make bold my soul to him to unfold, and show him all my woeful languishing. Love, since 'twast not thy will me to accord such boldness as that ever unto my king I may discover my sad heart's full hoard, or any word or sign thereof him bring. This all my prayer to thee, O sweet my lord, hie thee to him, and so him whispering, mind of the day I saw him tourneying, with all his paladins environed, and grew enamoured, even to my heart's disrupting. Which words Minuccio forthwith set to music, after a soft and plaintive fashion befitting their sense, and on the third day thereafter hied him to court, while King Pedro was yet at breakfast. And being bidden by the king to sing something at the accompaniment of his viol, he gave them this song, with such sweet concord of words and music that all the folk that were in the king's hall seemed, as it were, entranced. So intent and absorbed stood they to listen, and the king rather more than the rest. And when Minuccio had done singing, the king asked whence the song came. That, as far as he knew, he had never heard it before. "Sire," replied Minuccio, "'tis not yet 3 days since 'twas made, words and music alike." And being asked by the king in regard of whom 'twas made, "I dare not," quoth he, "discover such a secret save to you alone." Bent on hearing the story, the king, when the tables were cleared, took Minuccio into his privy chamber, and there Minuccio told him everything exactly as he had heard it from Lisa's lips, whereby the king was much gratified, and lauded the maiden not a little, and said that a girl of such high spirit merited considerable treatment, and bade Minuccio to be his envoy to her, and comfort her, and tell her that without fail that very day at vespers he would come to visit her. Overjoyed to bear the girl such gladsome tidings, Minuccio tarried not, but hied him back to the girl with his viol, and being closeted with her, told her all that had passed, and then sang the song to the accompaniment of his viol, whereby the girl was so cheered and delighted that forthwith there appeared most marked and manifest signs of the amendment of her health, while with passionate longing, albeit none in the house knew or divined it, she awaited the vesper hour, when she was to see her lord. Knowing the girl very well, and knowing how fair she was, and pondering divers times on what Minuccio had told him, the king, being a prince of a liberal and kindly disposition, grew ever more compassionate. So about vespers he mounted his horse and rode forth, as if for mere pleasure, and being come to the apothecary's house, demanded access to a very goodly garden that the apothecary had, and having dismounted, after a while enquired of Bernardo touching his daughter, and whether he had yet bestowed her in marriage. "Sire," replied Bernardo, "she is not yet married, and indeed she has been and is still very ill, howbeit since none she is wonderfully amended. The significance of which amendment being forthwith apprehended by the king, "In good faith," quoth he, "'twere a pity so fair a creature were reft from the world so early. We would go in and visit her." And presently, attended only by 2 of his lords and Bernardo, he betook him to her chamber, where, being entered, he drew nigh the bed whereon the girl had reclined, half sate in eager expectation of his coming. On taking her by the hand, "Madonna," quoth he, "what means this? A maiden like you should be the comfort of others, and you suffer yourself to languish. We would entreat you that for the love of us you be of good cheer, so as speedily to recover your health." To feel the touch of his hand, whom she loved above all else, albeit somewhat shamefast, was so enraptured that 'twas as if she was in paradise. And soon as she was able, "My lord," she said, "'twas the endeavour, weak as I am, to sustain a most grievous burden, that brought this sickness upon me. But 'twill not be long ere you will see me quit thereof, thanks to your courtesy." The hidden meaning of which words was apprehended only by the king, who momentarily made more account of the girl, and again inly cursed fortune, that had decreed that she should be the daughter of such a man. And yet a while he tarried with her, and comforted her, and so took his leave. Which gracious behaviour of the king was not a little commended, and accounted a signal honour to the apothecary and his daughter. The girl, glad at heart, as was ever lady of her lover, mended with reviving hope, and in a few days recovered her health, and therewith more than all her wonted beauty. Whereupon the king, having taken counsel with the queen how to reward so great a love, got him one day to horse with a great company of his barons, and hied him to the apothecary's house. And being come into the garden, he sent for the apothecary and his daughter. And there, being joined by the queen with not a few ladies, who received the girl into their company, they made such cheer as 'twas a wonder to see. And after a while, the king and queen having called Lisa to them, quoth the king, "Honourable damsel, by the great love that you have borne us, we are moved greatly to honour you, and we trust that, for love of us, the honour that we designed for you will be acceptable to you. Now, 'tis thus we would honour you, to wit, that, seeing that you are of marriageable age, we would have you take for husband him that we shall give you, albeit 'tis none the less our purpose ever to call ourself your knight, demanding no other tribute of all your love but one sole kiss." Scarlet from brow to neck, the girl, making the king's pleasure her own, thus with a low voice replied, "My lord, very sure am I that, should it come to be known that I was grown enamoured of you, most folk would hold me for a fool, deeming perchance that I was out of my mind, and witless alike of my own rank and yours. But God, who alone reads the hearts of us mortals, knows that even then, when first I did affect you, I wist that you were the king, and I but the daughter of Bernardo the apothecary, and that to suffer my passion to soar so high did ill become me. But as you know far better than I, none loves of set and discreet purpose, but only according to the dictates of impulse and fancy, which law my forces, albeit not seldom opposed, being powerless to withstand, I loved, and still love, and shall ever love you. But as no sooner knew I myself subjugated to your love, than I vowed to ever have no will but yours. Therefore not only am I compliant to take right gladly him whom you shall be pleased to give me for husband, thereby conferring upon me great honour and dignity, but if you should bid me tarry in the fire, delighted were I to obey, so thereby I might pleasure you. How far it beseems me to have you, my king, for my knight, you best know, and therefore I say naught thereof. Nor will the kiss which you crave as your sole tribute of my love be granted you save by leave of my lady the queen. Natheless may you have of this great graciousness that you and my lady the queen have shown me, and which I may not requite, abundant recompense in the blessing and favour of God. And so she was silent. The queen was mightily delighted with the girl's answer, and deemed her as discreet as the king had said. The king then sent for the girl's father and mother, and being assured that his intention had their approval, summoned to his presence a young man, Perdicone by name, that was of gentle birth, but in poor circumstances, and put certain rings into his hand, and, he nowise gainsaying, wedded him to Lisa. Which done, besides jewels many and precious that he and the queen gave the girl, he forthwith bestowed upon Perdicone 2 domains, right goodly and of ample revenues, to wit, Cephalou and Calaballotta, saying, We give them to thee for thy wife's dowry. What we have in store for thee thou wilt learn hereafter. Which said, he turned to the girl, and, Now, quoth he, we are minded to cull that fruit which is due to us of thy love. And so, taking her head between both his hands, he kissed her brow. Wherefore great was the joy of Perdicone, and the father and mother and Lisa herself, and mighty the cheer they made, and gaily did they celebrate the nuptials. And as many affirm, right well did the king keep his promise to the girl, for that ever while he lived he called himself her knight, nor went to any passage of arms bearing other device than that which he had from her. Now, 'tis by doing after this sort that sovereigns win the hearts of their subjects, give others occasion of well-doing, and gain for themselves an imperishable renown, at which mark few or none in our times have bent the brow of their understanding, the more part of the princes having become but cruel tyrants. End of Day 10, the 7th story. Recording by Miette of Miette's Bedtime Story Podcast.
Day 10, the 8th story of the Decameron, Part A. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.C. Guan. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the 8th story, Part A. Sophronia, albeit she deems herself wife to Gesippus, is wife to Titus Suentius Fulvus, and goes with him to Rome, where Gesippus arrives in indigence, and deeming himself scorned by Titus, to combat his own death, avers that he has slain a man. Titus recognizes him, and to save his life alleges that 'twas he that slew the man, whereof he that did the deed being witness, he discovers himself as the murderer, whereby it comes to pass that they are all three liberated by Octavianus, and Titus gives Gesippus his sister to wife, and shares with him all his substance.
So ceased Pampinea, and when all the ladies, and most of them Gebelin, had commended King Pedro, Philomela by command of the king thus began:
Magnificent my ladies, who wot not that there is naught so great but kings, when they have a mind, may accomplish it; as also that 'tis of them that magnificence is most especially demanded. Now whoso, being powerful, does that which it appertains him to do, does well, but therein is no such a matter of marvel or occasion of extolling him to the skies as in his deed, of whom, for that his power is slight, less is demanded. Wherefore, as you are so profuse of your word in exaltation of the fine deeds, as you deem them, of monarchs, I make no manner of doubt, but that the doings of our peers must seem to you yet more delectable and commendable, when they equal or surpass those of kings. Accordingly 'tis a transaction, laudable and magnificent, that passed between two citizens, who were friends, that I propose to recount to you in my story. I say then, that what time Octavianus Caesar, not as yet high Augustus, but being in the office called Triumvirate, swayed the empire of Rome, there dwelt at Rome a gentleman, Publius Quintius Fulvus by name, who, having a son, Titus Quintius Fulvus, that was a very prodigy of wit, sent him to Athens to study philosophy, and to the best of his power commended him to a nobleman of that city, Cremes by name, who was his very old friend. Cremes lodged Titus in his own house with his son Gesippus, and placed both Titus and Gesippus under a philosopher named Aristippus, to learn of him his doctrine. And the two youths, thus keeping together, found each the other's conversation so congruous with his own, that there grew up between them a friendship so close and brotherly, that was never broken by aught but death, nor knew either rest or solace save when he was with the other. So, gifted alike with preeminent subtlety of wit, they entered on their studies, and with even pace and prodigious applause scaled together the glorious heights of philosophy. In which way of life, to the exceeding great delight of Cremes, who entreated Titus as no less his son than Gesippus, they continued for full 3 years. At the end whereof it befell, after the common course of things mundane, that Cremes, being now aged, departed this life, whom with equal grief they mourn as a common father, and the friends and kinsfolk of Cremes were alike at a loss to determine whether of the twain stood in need of the more consolation upon the bereavement. Some months afterward the friends and kinsfolk of Gesippus came to him and exhorted him, as did also Titus, to take a wife, and found him a maiden, wondrous fair, of one of the most noble houses of Athens, her name Sophronia, and her age about 15 years. So a time was appointed for their nuptials, and one day, when 'twas near at hand, Gesippus bade Titus come see the maiden, whom as yet he had not seen, and they, being come into her house, and she sitting betwixt them, Titus, as he were fain to observe with care the several charms of his friend's wife that was to be, surveyed her with the closest attention, and being delighted beyond measure with all that he saw, grew, as inly he extolled her charms to the skies, enamoured of her, with a love as ardent, albeit he gave no sign of it, as ever lover bore to a lady. However, after they had tarried a while with her, they took their leave and went home, where Titus repaired to his chamber, and there gave himself over to solitary musing on the damsel's charms, and the longer he brooded, the more he burned for her. Whereon, as he reflected, having heaved many a fervent sigh, thus he began to commune with himself. Ah, woe worth thy life, Titus, whom makest thou the mistress of thy soul, thy love, thy hope? Knowest thou not that by reason as well of thy honourable entreatment by Cremes and his kin as the whole-hearted friendship that is between thee and Gesippus, it behoves thee to have his betrothed in even such pious regard as if she were thy sister. Whither art thou suffering beguiling love, delusive hope, to hurry thee? Open the eyes of thine understanding, and see thyself, wretched man as thou art, obey the dictates of thy reason, refrain thy carnal appetite, control thine inordinate desires, and give thy thoughts another bent, join battle with thy lust at the outset, and conquer thyself while there is yet time. This which thou wouldst have is not meet, is not seemly. This which thou art minded to ensue, thou wouldst rather, though thou wert, as thou art not, sure of its attainment, eschew, hadst thou but the respect thou shouldst have for the claims of true friendship. So then, Titus, what wilt thou do? What but abandon this unseemly love, if thou wouldst do as it behoves thee? But then, as he remembered Sophronia, his thoughts took the contrary direction, and he recounted all that he had said, musing on this wise: the laws of love are of force above all others. They abrogate not only the law of human friendship, but the law divine itself. How many times ere now has father loved daughter, brother sister, stepmother stepson? Aberrations far more notable than that a friend should love his friend's wife, which has happened 1,000 times. Besides which, I am young, and youth is altogether subject to the laws of love. Love's pleasure, then, should be mine. The seemly is for folk of riper years. 'Tis not in my power to will aught save that which love wills. So beauteous is this damsel that there is none but should love her, and if I love her, who am young, who can justly censure me? I love her not because she is the affianced of Gesippus. No matter whose she was, I should love her all the same. Herein is fortune to blame, that gave her to my friend Gesippus rather than to another. And if she is worthy of love, as for beauty she is, Gesippus, if he should come to know that I love her, ought to be less jealous than another. Then, scorning himself that he should indulge such thoughts, he relapsed into the opposing mood, albeit not to abide there, but ever veering to and fro. He spent not only the whole of that day and the ensuing night, but many others, insomuch that, being able neither to eat nor to sleep, he grew so weak that he was fain to take his bed. Gesippus, who had marked his moodiness for some days, and now saw that he was fairly sick, was much distressed, and with sedulous care, never quitting his side, he tended and strove as best he might to comfort him, not seldom and most earnestly demanding to know of him the cause of his melancholy and his sickness. Many were the subterfuges to which Titus resorted, but as Gesippus was not to be put off with his fables, finding himself hard pressed by him, with sighs and sobs he made answer on this wise: Gesippus, had such been the will of God, I were fain rather to die than to live, seeing that fortune has brought me a strait in which needs must my virtue be put to the ordeal, and to my worst grievous shame 'tis found wanting. Whereof I confidently expect my due reward, to wit, death, which will be more welcome to me than to live, haunted ever by the memory of my baseness, which, as there is naught that from thee I either should or can conceal, I, not without burning shame, will discover to thee. And so he recounted the whole story from first to last, the occasion of his melancholy, its several moods, their conflict, and which of them the victory rested, averring that he was dying of love for Sophronia, and that, knowing how ill such love beseemed him, he had for penance elected to die, and deemed the end was now not far off. Gesippus, hearing his words and seeing his tears, for a while knew not what to say, being himself smitten with the damsel's charms, albeit in a less degree than Titus, but ere long he made up his mind that Sophronia must be less dear to him than his friend's life. And so, moved to tears by his friend's tears, Titus, quoth he between his sobs, but that thou art in need of comfort, I should reproach thee, that thou hadst offended against our friendship, in that thou hast so long kept close from me this most distressful passion, and albeit thou didst deem it unseemly, yet unseemly things should no more than things seemly be withheld from a friend, for that, as a friend rejoices with his friend in things seemly, so he does in his endeavour to wean his friend from things unseemly. But enough of this for the nonce. I pass to that which, I wot, is of greater moment. If thou ardently lovest Sophronia, my affianced, so far from marvelling thereat, I should greatly marvel were it not so, knowing how fair she is, and how noble is thy soul, and thus the apter to be swayed by passion, the more excelling is she by whom thou art charmed, and the juster the cause thou hast to love Sophronia, the greater is the injustice with which thou complainest of fortune, albeit thou dost it not in so many words, for giving her to me, as if thy love of her had been seemly, had she belonged to any other but me, whereas, if thou art still the wise man thou wast wont to be, thou must know that to none could fortune have assigned her with such good cause for thee to thank her as to me. Had any other had her, albeit thy love had been seemly, he had loved her as his own rather than as thine, which, if thou deem me even such a friend to thee as I am, thou wilt not apprehend from me, seeing that I mind me not that since we were friends I had ever aught that was not as much thine as mine, and so should I entreat thee herein as in all other matters, were the affair gone so far that naught else were possible. But as it is, I can make thee sole possessor of her, and so I mean to do, for I know not what cause thou shouldst have to prize my friendship, if, where in seemly sort it might be done, I knew not how to surrender my will to thine. 'Tis true that Sophronia is my betrothed, and that I loved her much, and had great cheer in expectation of the nuptials, but as thou, being much more discerning than I, dost more fervently affect this rare prize, rest assured that she will enter my chamber not mine, but thine. Wherefore away with thy moodiness, banish thy melancholy, recover thy lost health, thy heartiness and jollity, and gladsomely, even from this very hour, anticipate the guerdon of thy love, a love worthier far than mine. Delightful as was the prospect with which hope flattered Titus, as he heard Gizippus thus speak, no less was the shame with which right reason affected him, admonishing him that the greater was the liberality of Gizippus, the less it would become him to profit thereby. Wherefore, still weeping, he thus constrained himself to make answer: Gizippus, thy generous and true friendship leaves me in no doubt as to the manner in which it becomes me to act. God forfend that her, whom as to the more worthy he has given to thee, I should ever accept of thee for mine. Had he seen fit that she should be mine, far be it from thee or any other to suppose that he would ever have awarded her to thee. Renounce not, then, that which thy choice and wise counsel, and his gift, have made thine, and leave me to whom, as unworthy, he has appointed no such happiness, to waste my life in tears, for either I shall conquer my grief, which will be grateful to thee, or it will conquer me, and so I shall be quit of my pain. Quoth then Gizippus, If our friendship, Titus, is of such a sort as may entitle me to enforce thee to eschew behests of mine, or as may induce thee of thine own free will to eschew the same, such is the use which, most of all, I am minded to put it, and if thou lend me considerate ear upon my prayers, I shall by force, that force which is lawful in the interest of a friend, make Sophronia thine. I know the might of love, how redoubtable it is, and how, not once only, but oftentimes, it has brought ill-starred lovers to a miserable death, and thee I see so hard-bested, that turn back thou mightst not, nor get the better of thy grief, but, holding on thy course, must succumb, and perish, and, without doubt, I should speedily follow thee. And so, had I no other cause to love thee, thy life is precious to me in that my own is bound up with it. Sophronia then shall be thine, for thou wouldst not lightly find another so much to thy mind, and I shall readily find another to love, and so shall content both thee and me. In which matter, peradventure, I might not be so liberal, were wives so scarce or hard to find as our friends, wherefore, as 'tis so easy a matter for me to find another wife, I had liefer, I say not lose her, for in giving her to thee lose her I shall not, but only transfer her to one that is my alter ego, and that to her advantage I shall liefer, I say, transfer her to thee than lose thee. And so, if aught my prayers avail with thee, I entreat thee extricate thyself from thy woeful plight, and comfort at once thyself and me, and in good hope address thyself to pluck that boon which thy fervent love craves of her for whom thou yearnest. Still scrupling for shame to consent that Sophronia should become his wife, Titus remained yet a while inexorable, but, yielding at last to the solicitations of love, reinforced by the exhortations of Gesippus, thus he made answer: Lo now, Gesippus, I know not how to call it, whether 'tis more thy pleasure than mine, 'tis which I do, seeing that 'tis as thy pleasure that thou so earnestly entreatest me to do it. But as thy liberality is such that my shame, though becoming, may not withstand it, I will even do it. But of this rest assured, that I do so, witting well that I receive from thee not only the lady I love, but with her my very life. And fate permitting, may the gods grant me to make thee such honourable and goodly requital as may show thee how sensible I am of the boon, which thou, more compassionate of me than I am of myself, conferrest on me. Quoth then Gesippus, Now for the giving effect to our purpose, methinks, Titus, we should proceed on this wise. Thou knowest that Sophronia by treaty at length concluded between my family and hers is become my betrothed. Were I now to say that she should not be my wife, great indeed were the scandal that would come thereof, and should affront both her family and mine own, whereof indeed I should make no account, so it gave me to see her become thine. But I fear that, were I to give her up at this juncture, her family would forthwith bestow her upon another, perchance than thee, and so we should both be losers. Wherefore methinks that, should thou approve, I were best to complete what I have begun, bring her home as my wife, and celebrate the nuptials, and thereafter we can arrange that thou lie with her, privily, as thy wife. Then, time and occasion serving, we will disclose the whole affair, and if they are satisfied, well and good; if not, 'twill be done all the same, and, as it cannot be undone, they must, perforce, make the best of it. Which counsel being approved by Titus, Gesippus brought the lady home as his wife, Titus being now recovered, and quite himself again. And when they had made great cheer, and night was come, the ladies, having bedded the bride, took their departure. Now the chambers of Titus and Gesippus were contiguous, and one might pass from one into the other. Gesippus, therefore, being come into his room, extinguished every ray of light, and stole into that of Titus, and bade him to get him to bed with his lady. Whereat Titus gave way to shame, and would have changed his mind and refused to go in. But Gizipus, no less zealous at heart than in words to serve his friend, after no small contention, prevailed on him to go thither. Now no sooner was Titus abed with the lady, than, taking her in his arms, he, as if jestingly, asked in a low tone whether she minded to be his wife. She, taking him to be Gizipus, answered yes, whereupon he set a fair and costly ring on her finger, saying, "And I am minded to be thy husband." And having presently consummated the marriage, he long and amorously disported him with her, neither she nor any other being ever aware that another than Gizipus lay with her. Now Titus and Sophronia being after this sort wedded, Publius, the father of Titus, departed this life, for which cause Titus was bidden by letter to return forthwith to Rome to see to his affairs, wherefore he took counsel with Gizipus how he might take Sophronia thither with him, which might not well be done without giving her to know how matters stood. Whereof accordingly one day, having called her into the chamber, they fully apprised her, Titus, for her better assurance, bringing her recollection not a little of what had passed between them. Whereat she, after glancing from one to the other somewhat disdainfully, burst into a flood of tears, and reproached Gizipus that he had so deluded her, and forthwith, saying naught of the matter to any there, she hied her forth to Gizipus' house and home to her father, to whom and her mother she recounted the deceit which Gizipus had practised upon them as upon her, averring that she was the wife not of Gizipus, as they supposed, but of Titus, whereby her father was aggrieved exceedingly, and prolonged and grave complaint was made thereof by him and his own and Gizipus' families, and there was not a little parleying, and a world of pother. Gizipus earned the hatred of both his own and Sophronia's kin, and all agreed that he merited not only censure but severe punishment. He, however, averred that he had done a thing seemly, and that Sophronia's kinsfolk owed him thanks for giving her in marriage to one better than himself. All which Titus witnessed with great suffering, and witting that 'twas the way of the Greeks to launch forth in high words and menaces, and refrain not until they should meet with one that answered them, whereupon they were wont to grow not only humble but even abject, was at length minded that their clavers should no longer pass unanswered, and, as with his Roman temper he united Athenian subtlety, he cleverly contrived to bring the kinsfolk, as well of Gizipus as of Sophronia, together in a temple, where, being entered, attended only by Gizipus, thus, they being intent to hear, he harangued them. "'Tis the opinion of not a few philosophers, that whatsoever mortals do is ordained by the providence of the immortal gods, for which cause some would have it that naught either is, or ever shall be, done, save of necessity, albeit others there are that restrict this necessity to that which is already done. Regard we but these opinions with some little attention, and we shall very plainly perceive that to censure that which cannot be undone is naught else but to be minded to show oneself wiser than the gods, by whom we must suppose that we and our affairs are swayed and governed with uniform and unerring wisdom. Whereby you may very readily understand how vain and foolish a presumption it is to pass judgment on other doings, and what manner and might of chains they need who suffer themselves to be transported to such excess of daring, among whom, in my judgment, you must one and all be numbered, if 'tis true, what I hear, to wit, that you have complained and do continue to complain that Sophronia, albeit you gave her to Gizipus, is nevertheless become my wife, not considering that 'twas ordained from all eternity that she should become not the wife of Gizipus but mine, as the fact does now declare. End of Part A of Day 10, the 8th story. Day 10, the 8th story of the Decameron, Part B. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.C. Guan. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 10, the 8th story, Part B. But for that discourse of the secret providence and purposes of the gods seems to many a matter hard and scarce to be understood, I am willing to assume that they meddle in no wise with our concerns, and to descend to the region of human counsels, in speaking whereof I must needs do two things quite at variance with my wont, to wit, in some degree praise myself and censure or vilify another. But, as in either case I mean not to deviate from the truth, and 'tis what the occasion demands, I shall not fail to do so. With bitter upbraidings, animated rather by rage than by reason, you cease not to murmur, nay to cry out, against Gizippus, and to harass him with your abuse, and hold him condemned, for that her, whom you saw fit to give him, he has seen fit to give me, to wife, wherein I deem him worthy of the highest commendation, and that for two reasons. First, because he has done the office of a friend, and secondly, because he has done more wisely than you did. After what sort the sacred laws of friendship prescribe that friend shall entreat friend, 'tis not my present purpose to declare. 'Twill suffice to remind you that the tie of friendship should be more binding than that of blood or kinship, seeing that our friends are of our own choosing, whereas our kinsfolk are appointed us by fortune. Wherefore, if my life was more to Gizippus than your good will, since I am as I hold myself his friend, can any wonder thereat? But pass we to my second reason, in the exposition whereof I must needs with yet more cogency prove you that he has been wiser than you, seeing that methinks you wot not of the providence of the gods, and still less of the consequences of friendship. I say then, that as 'twas your premeditated and deliberate choice that gave Sophronia to this young philosopher Gizippus, so 'twas his that gave her to another young philosopher. 'Twas your counsel that gave her to an Athenian, 'twas his that gave her to a Roman. 'Twas your counsel that gave her to a man of gentle birth, 'twas his that gave her to one of birth yet gentler. Wealthy was he to whom your counsel gave her, most wealthy he to whom his counsel gave her. Not only did he to whom your counsel gave her love her not, but he scarce knew her, whereas 'twas the one that loved her beyond all other blessings, nay, more dearly than his own life, that his counsel gave her. And to the end that it may appear more plainly that 'tis even as I say, and Gizippus' counsel more to be commended than yours, let us examine it point by point, that I, like Gizippus, am young and a philosopher, my countenance and my pursuits may, without making more words about the matter, sufficiently attest. We are also of the same age, and have ever kept pace together in our studies. Now true it is that he is an Athenian, and I am a Roman. But as touching the comparative glory of the cities, should the matter be mooted, I say that I am of a free city, and he of a city tributary, that I am of a city that is mistress of all the world, and he of one that is subject to mine, that I am of a city that flourishes mightily in arms, in empire, and in art, whereas he cannot boast his city as famous, save in arts. Moreover, albeit you see me here in the guise of a most humble scholar, I am not born of the dregs of the populace of Rome. My halls and the public places of Rome are full of the antique effigies of my forefathers, and the annals of Rome abound with the records of triumphs led by the Quintii to the Roman Capitol, and so far from age having withered it, today, yet more abundantly than ever of yore, flourishes the glory of our name. Of my wealth I forbear, for shame, to speak, being mindful that honest poverty is time-honoured, and the richest inheritance of the noble citizens of Rome. But, allowing for the nonce the opinion of the vulgar, which holds poverty in disrepute, and highly appraises wealth, I, albeit I never sought it, yet, as the favoured of fortune, have abundant store thereof. Now well I wot that Giuseppus, being of your own city, you justly prized and prize an alliance with him, but not a whit less should you prize an alliance with me at Rome, considering that there you will have in me an excellent host, and a patron apt, zealous, and potent, to serve you as well in matters of public interest as in your private concerns, who then, dismissing all bias from his mind, and judging with impartial reason, would deem your counsel more commendable than that of Giuseppus. Assuredly none. Sophronia, then, being married to Titus Quintius Fulvus, a citizen of Rome, of an ancient and illustrious house, and wealthy, and a friend of Giuseppus, whoso takes umbrage of offence thereat, does that which it behoves him not to do, and knows not what he does. Perchance some will say that their complaint is not that Sophronia is the wife of Titus, but that she became his wife after such a sort, to wit, privily, by theft, neither friend nor any of her kin witting aught thereof. But herein is no matter of marvel, no prodigy as yet unheard of. I need not instance those who before now have taken to them husbands in defiance of their father's will, or have eloped with their lovers, and been their mistresses before they were their wives, or of whose marriages no word has been spoken, until their pregnancy or parturition published them to the world, and necessity sanctioned the fact. Naught of this has happened in the case of Sophronia. On the contrary, 'twas in proper form, and in meet and seemly sort, that Giuseppus gave her to Titus, and others peradventure will say that 'twas by one to whom such office belonged not that she was bestowed in marriage. Nay, but this is but vain and womanish querulousness, and comes of scant consideration. Know we not, then, that fortune varies according to circumstances, her methods, and her means of disposing events to their predetermined ends? What matter it is to me, if it be a cobbler rather than a philosopher, that fortune has ordained to compass something for me, whether privily or overtly, so only the result is as it should be. I ought, indeed, to take order, if the cobbler be indiscreet, that he meddle no more in affairs of mine, but at the same time I ought to thank him for what he has done. If Giuseppus has duly bestowed Sophronia in marriage, it is gratuitous folly to find fault with the manner and the person. If you mistrust his judgment, have a care that it be not in his power to do the like again, but thank him for this turn. Natheless, you are to know that I used no cunning practice or deceit to sully in any degree the fair fame of your house in the person of Sophronia, and, albeit I took her privily to wife, I came not as a ravisher to despoil her of her virginity, nor in any hostile sort was I minded to make her mine on dishonourable terms, and spurn your alliance, but, being fervently enamoured of her bewitching beauty and her noble qualities, I wist well that, should I make suit for her with those formalities with you, perchance, will say were due, then, for the great love you bear her, and for fear lest I should take her away with me to Rome, I might not hope to have her. Accordingly, I made use of the secret practice which is now manifest to you, and brought Giuseppus to consent in my interest to that whereto he was averse, and thereafter, ardently though I loved her, I sought not to commingle with her as a lover, but as a husband, nor closed with her, until, as she herself by her true witness may assure you, I had but apt words, and with the ring made her my lawful wife, asking her if she would have me to husband, whereto she answered yes, wherein, if she seems to have been tricked, 'tis not I that am to blame, but she, for that she asked me not who I was. This, then, is the great wrong, sin, crime, whereof for love and friendship's sake Gizippus and I are guilty, that Sophronia is privily become the wife of Titus Quinctius. 'Tis for this that you harass him with your menaces and hostile machinations. What more would you do, had he given her to a villain, to a caitiff, to a slave? Where would you find fetters, dungeons, crosses adequate to your vengeance? But enough of this at present. An event, which I did not expect, has now happened. My father is dead, and I must needs return to Rome, wherefore, being fain to take Sophronia with me, I have discovered to you that which otherwise I had, perchance, still kept close. Whereto, if you are wise, you will gladly reconcile yourselves, for that, if I had been minded to play you false, or put an affront upon you, I might have scornfully abandoned her to you. But God forefend that such baseness be ever harboured in a Roman breast. Sophronia, then, by the will of the gods, by force of law, and by my own love-taught astuteness, is mine. The which it would seem that you, deeming yourselves, peradventure, wiser than the gods, or the rest of mankind, do foolishly set at naught, and that in two ways alike most offensive to me, inasmuch as you both withhold from me Sophronia, in whom right, as against me, you have none, and also entreat as your enemy Gizippus, to whom you are rightfully bounden. The folly whereof I purpose not at present fully to expound to you, but in friendly sort to counsel you to abate your wrath and abandon all your schemes of vengeance, and restore Sophronia to me, that I may part from you on terms of amity and alliance, and so abide. But of this rest assured, that whether this, which is done, like you or not, if you are minded to contravene it, I shall take Gizippus hence with me, and once arrived in Rome, shall, in your despite, find means to recover her who is lawfully mine, and pursuing you with unremitting enmity, will apprise you by experience of the full measure and effect of a Roman's wrath. Having so said, Titus started to his feet, his countenance distorted by anger, and took Gizippus by the hand, and with manifest contempt for all the rest, shaking his head at them and threatening them, led him out of the temple. They that remained in the temple, being partly persuaded by his arguments to accept his alliance and friendship, partly terrified by his last words, resolved by common consent that 'twas better to have the alliance with Titus, as they had lost that of Gizippus, than to add to that loss the enmity of Titus. Wherefore they followed Titus, and having come up with him, told him that they were well pleased that Sophronia should be his, and that they should prize his alliance and the friendship of dear Gizippus, and having ratified this treaty of amity and alliance with mutual cheer, they departed and sent Sophronia to Titus. Sophronia, discreetly making a virtue of necessity, transferred forthwith to Titus the love she had borne Gizippus, and being come with Titus to Rome, was there received with no small honour. Gizippus tarried in Athens, held in little account by well nigh all the citizens, and being involved in certain of their broils, was, not long afterwards, with all his household, banished the city, poor, nay destitute, and condemned to perpetual exile. Thus hard bested, and at length reduced to mendiancy, he made his way, so as least discomfortably he might, to Rome, being minded to see whether Titus would remember him, and there, learning that Titus lived, and was much affected by all the Romans, and having found out his house, he took his stand in front of it, and watched until Titus came by, to whom, for shame of the sorry trim that he was in, he ventured no word, but did his endeavour that he might be seen of him, hoping that Titus might recognize him, and call him by his name. But Titus passing on, Gizippus deemed that he had seen and avoided him, and calling to mind that which aforetime he had done for him, went away, wroth and desperate, and fasting and penniless, and, for 'twas now night, knowing not whither he went, and yearning above all for death, he wandered by chance to a spot which, albeit 'twas within the city, had much the aspect of a wilderness, and espying a spacious grotto, he took shelter in there for the night, and worn out at last with grief, on the bare ground, wretchedly clad as he was, he fell asleep. Now 2 men that had that night gone out a thieving, having committed the theft, came towards morning to the grotto, and there quarrelled, and the stronger slew the other, and took himself off. Aroused by the noise, Giuseppus witnessed the murder, and deeming that he had now the means of compassing without suicide the death for which he so much longed, budged not a jot, but stayed there, until the serjeants of the court, which had already got wind of the affair, came on the scene, and laid violent hands upon him, and led him away. Being examined, he confessed that he had slain the man, and had then been unable to make his escape from the grotto. Wherefore the praetor, Marcus Varro by name, sentenced him to death by crucifixion, as was then the custom. But Titus, who happened at that moment to come into the praetorium, being told the crime for which he was condemned, and scanning the poor wretch's face, presently recognized him for Giuseppus, and marvelled how he should come to be there, and in such a woeful plight, and most ardently desiring to succour him, not seeing other way to save his life except to exonerate him by accusing himself, he straightway stepped forward, and said with a loud voice, "Marcus Varro, call back the poor man on whom thou hast passed sentence, for he is innocent. 'Tis enough that I have incurred the wrath of the gods by one deed of violence, to wit, the murder of whom your serjeants found dead this morning, without aggravating my offence by the death of another innocent man." Perplexed and vexed that he should have been heard by all in the praetorium, but unable honourably to avoid compliance with that which laws enjoined, Varro had Giuseppus brought back, and, in presence of Titus, said to him, "How camest thou to be so mad as, though no constraint was put upon thee, to confess a deed thou never didst, thy life being at stake? Thou saidst that 'twas thou by whom the man was slain last night, and now comes this other, and says that 'twas not thou, but he that slew him." Giuseppus looked, and seeing Titus, wist well that, being grateful for the service rendered by him in the past, Titus was now minded to save his life at the cost of his own. Wherefore, affected to tears, he said, "Nay, but, Varro, in very sooth I slew him, and 'tis now too late, this tender solicitude of Titus for my deliverance." But on his part, "Praetor," quoth Titus, "thou seest this man is a stranger, and was found unarmed beside the murdered man. Thou canst not doubt that he was fain of death for very wretchedness. Wherefore discharge him, and let punishment light on me, who have merited it." Marvelling at the importunity of both, Varro readily surmised that neither was guilty, and while he was casting about how he might acquit them, lo, in came a young man, one Publius Ambustus, a desperate character, and known to all the Romans for an arrant thief. He it was that had verily committed the murder, and witting both the men to be innocent of that of which each accused himself, so sore at heart was he by reason of their innocence, that, overborne by an exceeding great compassion, he presented himself before Varro, and, "Praetor," quoth he, "'tis destiny draws me hither to loose the knot of these men's contention, and some god within me leaves me no peace of his whips and stings, until I discover my offence. Wherefore know that neither of these men is guilty of that which each accuses himself. 'Tis verily I that slew the man this morning, about daybreak, and before I slew him, while I was sharing our plunder with him, I espied this poor fellow asleep there. Naught need I say to clear Titus. The general bruit of his illustrious renown attests that he is not a man of such a sort. Discharge him, therefore, and extract from me the penalty prescribed by the laws." The affair had by this time come to the ears of Octavianus, who caused all three to be brought before him, and demanded to know the causes by which they had been severally moved to accuse themselves, and, each having told his story, Octavianus released the two by reason of their innocence, and the third for love of them. Titus took Chrysippus home, having first chidden him not a little for his faint-heartedness and diffidence, and there Sophronia, receiving him as a brother, did him marvellous cheer, and having comforted him a while, and arrayed him in apparel befitting his worth and birth, he first shared with him all his substance, and then gave him his sister, a young damsel named Fulvia, to wife, and said to him, "Choose now, Chrysippus, whether thou wilt tarry here with me, or go back to Achaia with all that I have given thee." Partly perforce of his banishment from his city, partly for that the sweet friendship of Titus was justly dear to him, Chrysippus consented to become a Roman. And so long and happily they lived together at Rome, Chrysippus with his Fulvia, and Titus with his Sophronia, in the same house, growing, if possible, greater friends day by day. Exceeding sacred then is friendship, and worthy not only to be had in veneration, but to be extolled with never-ending praise, as the most dutiful mother of magnificence and seemliness, sister of gratitude and charity, and foe to enmity and avarice, ever, without waiting to be asked, ready to do as generously by another as she would be done by herself. Rarely indeed is it to-day that twain are found, in whom her most holy fruits are manifest, for which is most shamefully answerable the covetousness of mankind, which, regarding only private interest, has banished friendship beyond earth's farthest bourne, there to abide in perpetual exile. How should love, or wealth, or kinship, how should aught but friendship have so quickened the soul of Chrysippus, that the tears and sighs of Titus should incline his heart to cede to him the fair and gracious lady that was his betrothed and his beloved? Laws, menaces, terror, how should these, how should aught but friendship have withheld Chrysippus, in lonely places, in hidden retreats, in his own bed, from enfolding, not perchance unsolicited by her, the fair damsel within his youthful embrace? Honours, rewards, gains, would Chrysippus for these, would he, for aught but friendship, have made nothing of the loss of kindred, his own and Sophronia's, have made nothing of the injurious murmurs of the populace, have made nothing of mocks and scorns, so only he might content his friend? And on the other hand, for what other cause than friendship had Titus, when he might decently have feigned not to see, have striven with the utmost zeal to compass his own death, and set himself upon the cross in Chrysippus' stead? Chi avrebbe Tito senza alcuna dilazione fatto liberalissimo a comunicare il suo ampissimo patrimonio con Crisippo, al quale la fortuna il suo aveva tolto, se non costei? And what but friendship had left no place for suspicion in the soul of Titus, and filled it with a most fervent desire to give his sister to Chrysippus, albeit he saw him to be reduced to extreme penury and destitution? But so it is that men covet hosts of acquaintance, troops of kinsfolk, offsprings in plenty, and the number of their dependents increases with their wealth, and they reflect not that there is none of these, be he who he may, but will be more apprehensive of the least peril threatening himself than cumbered to avert a great peril from his lord or kinsman, whereas between friends we know 'tis quite contrariwise. End of Day 10, the 8th story. Read by J.C. Guan, January 2009.